Welcome to One of a Kind podcast. Slay that stage, your backstage pass to the minds of world champions of public speaking.
Discover the stories, the strategies, and the skills of world-class speakers and get ready to transcend your fear of public speaking and slay every stage life presents to you.
Hello, and welcome back to your very own podcast, Slay That Stage, Champions Tour. As always, we have another exciting guest, world champion, 20. No, I will not give that secret out. How about Tanvi? You bring the guest in.
Yes. Thank you, Aisha. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another podcast for Slay That Stage, a World Champions Tour. Every episode, it gives us immense pleasure and privilege both to feel the excitement of introducing a brand new world champion to you because it's not just about hosting someone who's extraordinary in their art and craft, but it's also the excitement of learning from their journey and their story. And I know you feel the same way every time you tune in to check out yet another engaging and enriching conversation. And today we are joined by someone who's a self proclaimed introvert, and I totally empathize with that, but yet a world champion of public speaking. Join me in welcoming none other than Aaron Beverley, the 2019 champion of Toastmasters International Speech Contest, where he literally transcended the whole competition and emerged victorious. Simply put, over 30,000 folks were competing that year across the world. A very entertaining and insightful speech that he gave during the contest, titled An Unbelievable Story, has really touched me at least because it's got a lovely message overall, apart from the whole art and craft of his speech craft that you can see. So please go check it out if you've not seen Aaron's winning speech. Like I said, Aaron's been a world class introvert like myself, and he's a brilliant storyteller, as you'll see in his speech, as well as you'll discover today in the conversation with her. But over the last 4 years, he's been working on his other career. Then we'll get to know more about that in the conversation. But he, of course, speaks as well as a speaker, and he's invited to Fortune 500 companies across the world, as well as international notable universities across the world. So, without much ado, welcome. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Aisha, for having me.
Aaron, as Tanvi was introducing you, the word introvert literally screamed at me. From being an introvert to world stage, that sounds a scary journey. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. I never was a person who wanted to be in the spotlight. I never wanted to be at the front of the stage or at the front of the line. I always wanted to be in the background where it was nice and safe. And I learned over the years that I was shy. I didn't really like the concept of standing out because what if somebody rejected me? So that always caused me to fall back. It wasn't until I got to college and I was about to graduate college, and then we hit a financial pandemic or a financial crisis, and all of the job opportunities that I thought I was going to have evaporated. So I started to really think about what I could do to stand out from the crowd. What could I do to help me advance my career that had yet to even start? And public speaking was the one element that stood out. So I joined Toastmasters in the year 2009, and I haven't looked back since. But over the years, I started to understand that introversion doesn't necessarily mean that you're the person that wants to be in the background. All introversion means is, how do you get your energy? Do you need to recharge by being alone, or do you recharge by social interaction with other people? That's what introversion is. So being shy and being introverted, two different things.
So true, Aaron. I think,
That
yeah, please go ahead, Aisha.
no, I got caught up when you said recharge, and I'm assuming a lot of our audience are introvert. So can you give a few tips on how you recharge as an introvert to be able to go back and give it your full when you are on the stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, recharging is as simple as being by myself and taking a nap. I like to joke that usually when I give a keynote speech and I engage with my audience, the next thing that I will do is go into my hotel room and take a nice little nap before I start going back and engaging the audiences again. But there are various ways you can recharge, and it's just a matter of what do you like to do? What do you enjoy doing? A lot of people can, for instance, they like to take a book and read a book, or they're like me, they like to take a nap, or they just like to go on a walk and just be alone with their thoughts. So there are various ways to recharge, but one of the ways that you truly know if you're an introvert or not is if you go out with friends and you feel recharged that way, and when you're alone, that's when you feel that you're bored, that you're drained of energy, then you're probably more on the extroverted side. You're probably more on the introverted side if the opposite is true, where you engage with your friends and you lose energy. But when you're alone and you're alone with your thoughts and you can sit down and read a good book by yourself and you recharge, then you're likely leaning on the introvert side.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Tami.
For me, it's a book thing, actually. I'm quite a bookworm, evidently. But yeah, that's the way I recharge. I think almost every night before I wind up, I need to lose myself in something or the other. That just helps me not only recharge, but also expand my
Yes.
consciousness. So that's the way I recharge and manage my introvertedness while being on the stage and in front of people serving throughout the rest of the time. Okay, so my question to you, Aaron, is that 2009, 2019, a decade of being a Toastmaster, what inspired you finally to compete when you did? And was it your first attempt? I would love to know that as well.
I decided to start competing in 2012, and it was after I heard the 2011 World Championship of Public Speaking. The person who inspired me to go ahead and do the contest was actually not even the champion from 2011, but rather the second place winner in 2011, Kwang Yu Yang. He gave this speech called Fortune Cookie, and I heard this speech, I heard the story, and I was just fascinated by the fact that somebody could get on stage and tell a very simple story to a large audience and it being received so well. I thought to myself, okay, I can do this and I'm going to do it. So I decided in 2012 to compete, and I had it set in my mind that I was going to be the world champion of public speaking in 2012. I was going to win in my first year. Everything was going to align perfectly. It was set in stone. That's the exact way that it was going to happen. So you can imagine my surprise after that year. I came second in the area contest, which is only round 2 out of 6.
Right. And did you continue
How did
competing
you?
next year, or did you take
Oh,
a
yeah.
break to recharge?
So no, I actually went straight through. I started in 2012, as I said, and came in second place in the second round. Now, when I did that, I realized that I needed help, and I needed help through coaching and mentoring. I had a lot of the talent, if you will, but I didn't exactly know how to hone that talent or utilize that talent so that I could create a good speech for my audience.
Correct.
So the following year in 2013, I had coaching. And when you get a coach, you really want to find a coach that fits you, and you want a coach that is knowledgeable, obviously. I had been lucky enough to go to college where one of my professors was one of the previous, not only a previous competitor in the international speech contest, he had placed second in 1992. However, he was also the 2005-2006 international president of Toastmasters International.
Okay.
His name is Dilip Abesekara, and he was the person that introduced me to Toastmasters. But it wasn't until I started competing and realized that I needed help, that I decided to tap him on the shoulder and ask if he could coach me for the 2013 International Speech Contest year. And it was that year where I went from 2012 not even being able to get out of the second round, and I made it all the way to the semifinals of the World Championship of Public Speaking the very next year, just with his coaching. And then following that year, I competed in 2014, 15, 16. I was able to get to the world stage for the first time, and I placed second. Then I competed in 17, and I didn't get back to the finals. I competed in 18 and couldn't get back to the semifinals. So it was at that point where I said to myself, wow, I feel like I'm doing all of the right things, but my results are regressing. And I got into a really bad spot where I wouldn't call it depression, but I was just very down on myself as a speaker because I wasn't getting the result that I wanted. So when 2019 came around, I decided that, you know what, this year is going to be the year I'm going to do things differently. 2019 was the first year where I didn't make it my goal at the beginning of the year or make it my New Year's resolution to win the World Championship of Public Speaking, insert whatever year it was. And it was the first year where I didn't do that. And that was the year that I won the World Championship of Public Speaking.
And I find it extremely easy to believe because when I look at it from a very spiritual perspective, the easier and faster you're able to detach from a desired outcome, the more effortless it flows into your life, right? I think it's just law of energetics. But hats off to the resilience and the commitment that year after year you progress towards different tiers of growth, performance, regress somewhere, and yet you kept going until you obviously hit your goal that you were working on almost for a decade, from 2012 to 2019, 7 years of being at it. I haven't heard a story on this stage, on this platform, Aisha, that somebody's been that resilient and ultimately made it with all the grit and commitment. So I'm so proud of you, Aaron, that you were able to do that. Congratulations on that level of superhuman resilience. Honestly, I don't think I have that in me, but I would love to hear from Aisha. It's been 2 years for you as well. And I know you've had, your minor spiral this year as well when you didn't win as expected. But what do you think stands out for you from Aaron's story of resilience?
Um, so the way it started for me last year when I competed, everything as Aaron said, I was like, I've got the district. So for me, the journey till district has, knock on wood, last, like when I did humorous or the last two, it had been easier comparatively. But district somehow has always been my roadblock. But last year I was like, I got it. My speech is the best. This is like my year. And I didn't even place.
Hmm.
And the worst part was I had cameras on me because people were expecting me to win. And to be able to not react in a way and still clap for the winner, not showing any sign, for me, that was the most difficult aspect of it. But what shifted between last year and this year, and as an Aaron said, last year it was solely that I need that trophy. But this year when I was competing, like Tanvi and I had discussed, she knew my story, was where was I just wanted to share my story and my message and hopefully change one life along that way. And voila, I get the second trophy. So I completely agree at that aspect. That's just that switch that I'm not here for the trophy, but for that message to give it to somebody. Or as I remember, I think it's Mark Brown who had said that if you had 5 to 7 minutes and the entire world is listening, what would you actually like to tell them? And once you get that mind state, and I think that shifts the whole thing. And I think that's what Aaron said, that's what shifted him the year he won. But resilience for 10 years, I mean, hats off. 2 years, and I'm already like, I'm like literally last year when I didn't place, my first reaction was, I'm never doing this again. I'm not putting myself through this again. I'm done with this. But 5 minutes later, I was standing next to Alexander Matt, who placed second the year before. And I said, what would have I done differently? And he said, stop aiming for the trophy. And for me, that changed. So yeah, that's off to your resilience. And because being 2 years in a row, I know how frustrating it is.
Yeah.
But that also goes to say, saying that what do you want and how bad do you want it? That gets you going, I think so. But I have a question. When Aaron, I heard your story, and I'm listening to the whole story. I'm completely lost in that Indian wedding. I can actually picture it. Being Indian myself, I've seen it. Um, so I could literally visualize entire scene. But in literally last 30 seconds, snap, and you change the entire message.
Hmm.
That touched me in a way that I cannot describe in words. Because that is something I'm actually championing for, where I say acceptance for all. Why that
Yeah.
particular story? And how did you develop that switch? Because right now I'm like complete Bollywood theme. Oh, that whole movie is going on, everybody in colorful, and suddenly that switch. What was the thought process?
Earlier that year, I had decided that my theme was going to be around unity and embracing other people. In my semifinal speech, for instance, I told family stories, and I just told some family stories that have been shared over the years. I told a story about my mother when she was a child with her brother and sister. And then I told another story from my mother's perspective about when I was around the age of 2 and I learned a bad word that she accidentally had spoken out. And I brought all of that together by talking about how family stories unify us. We're unified when we tell family stories because a lot of people can relate to that. A lot of people would think, oh, yeah, I have a very similar situation. I had a child that said a bad word and they just ran with that bad word all the time. Or I had a game where I played as a child where it was, when you think about it, was very stupid, but we did it anyway. And it's those family stories that can connect people. So that was what I wanted something similar for my final speech. And I knew I had a really good, vibrant story with the story of me going to my friend's wedding and being in charge of protecting the groom's shoes, and the hijinks ensued. I'm not going to ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. I definitely encourage you to watch it. It all really did happen. It all absolutely happened, and it was, the story started to shift when I started to learn the reason why the game was played. And when I knew that the reason that the game is played was to connect families, I thought to myself, wow, I can make that into a story about unity. I can make that into a story about, or I can make it into a message about unity, about embracing other people that may look different from you. And that was where it took root. So it started with the story, and then I figured out the message afterwards.
Interesting. Okay. So
That's
you
interesting.
usually know what message you want to share, and then you're trying to pick out the right stories from your life.
Yep.
That brings me to my question to you: is what shifted in your journey of competing, at least when you worked without a coach in your very first attempt, and then when you worked with coach again in the next year of your competing? And did you continue the journey of working with a coach year after year because your journey went on till you won? Can you
Yeah,
tell us what are the few things you learned in this journey of working with and without a coach?
absolutely. Absolutely. I would say that there were two main things that I learned working with Dilip. It was one, storytelling. You need to have a personal story that can connect you to the audience that you're speaking to. When I had tried to speak in 2012, I was just trying to preach to my audience. I was giving them this analogy and then telling them, okay, you need to follow your dreams. You need to do this. You need to do that. And I'm only 23 years old talking to people who are twice my age, telling them that they need to do something. I really had no experience. I had no authority. And even if I was older, still sharing just an analogy and just preaching down to people, that's one of the easiest ways for an audience to reject you. If you're just telling them what to do, but not giving them any context as to why they should listen to you.
Yeah.
And they'll figure out that they should listen to you from your story. We are wired for stories as human beings. We live our lives almost as a story where we have those ups, we have those downs, we have triumphs, we have failures, and all of it is enrapturing. So storytelling was one. And then the second one was just the fundamentals of speaking, the proper eye contact, the pacing, the power of pausing. That was something that really stood out with Dilip because he is a master. If you ever heard him speak, he is a master of the pause and just allowing silence to say the things that honestly can't be expressed in words. So those were the two things that really stood out. And those were the two things that I really started to incorporate after 2012. Now, 2012 was the only year where I was officially coached by someone. It was me taking Dilip's lessons and then trying to find my own spin on it. So I had the fundamentals. After I learned the fundamentals of storytelling and public speaking in general, it was time to find, okay, what is my style now? And a coach really can't teach you a style. That's something that you have to, or at least in my experience, you have to come to a realization for yourself.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think your personal style of speaking is exactly what differentiates a great speaker from an iconic speaker because, it is this ecosystem where we've been meeting and talking to so many amazing champions. We've seen every speaker has had such a distinct rhythm, style, and brand of speaking, right?
Yes.
That they all are inimitable in their own right. They all do the art of speaking phenomenally well, but there's something which is almost inexplicable in words that you can just feel because that's where the whole frequency of that person is felt by every cell of our body. That this is what makes you so unique and irresistible as a speaker. But is there a message that you have now, based on these lines, and how can uh, speakers, amateur speakers, aspiring speakers, aspiring participants in a contest and beyond discover this personal signature style of speaking? How did you arrive at that? And then any lessons from thereof?
So for me, I started to develop my style by watching other types of speaking and testing it out to see how it felt. I remember in 2014, I decided to do something a little bit more dramatic. I basically gave my speech in the form of a long poem almost, and it was based on a fairy tale of the three little pigs and the big bad wolf. And I did it as an analogy of, again, having a dream and following through with it.
Right.
And I had voice characters. I did a big bad wolf that had a big bad voice, and it felt good to give in the moment. But as I look back on that speech, while it was fun to give at the moment, again, there was no connection to me as the speaker, as the person. And I think that the gimmick overshowed the speaker. And if your gimmick outshines you, then you have a little bit of a problem. And that's the difficulty that I had there. So I realized from testing it out that that wasn't the style that I needed to take. And I actually found my style almost by mistake. I remember in 2014, I saw the world champion of public speaking get crowned that year, Danajaya. And I just remember how simple it was. And it was just a simple personal story that he told about his life. And I said, okay, I only have one personal story that I think is good enough for a speech contest. So in 2015, I told a speech, or gave a speech rather, about a bad date experience that I had when I was 15 years old. And I got to my district, but couldn't get out of my district. I placed second that year in my district. After 2 years of winning my district, this year I had seemingly regressed in result.
Correct.
But one person came up to me after the contest and he said, Aaron, I've heard you speak for the prior 2 years. That is the best speech that I've ever heard you give. And that stayed with me because, okay, this personal story that I used resonated with someone. So instead of throwing it away and trying again next year, I had the benefit of being a part of 2 districts. So I just took that same speech, revised it, honed it up, and used it for the other district the following year in 2016. And 2016 was the year that I made it to the World Championship of Public Speaking, using that speech to get me there.
Wow. So while you were speaking, I was just realizing something, and possibly this is what is the underlying factor for the resilience you've beautifully shown us, that it doesn't really matter if person wins or not. Eventually, it's great to win, but if you've outgrown yourself year after year for those 7 years, you're already at least say minimum 7x better speaker than where you started off.
Yeah.
And maybe you didn't win because you weren't the best, but maybe just someone else did a much better job in outgrowing themselves as a speaker as well, right? So winning is so relative when you look at it like that, when you're not competing, but when you're just personally outgrowing yourself. Aisha, how are you going to take this insight in your next competing streak?
So the way I look at it is public speaking is subjective. And just as in any art, my story may have not touched the judges, but have touched the audience. Just as Aaron said, I remember even after last year when I didn't place, I had somebody come and hug me with tears and said, please come back next year. I'd love to hear you. And I think that was my switch. And this year, when I placed second, I had easily 10 people coming back and said, your story has touched me, and I'm definitely going to be using kinder words going forward. So for me, that's a huge win. And just as in any art, somebody may like it, somebody may not like it. But in a contest, obviously, the judges have to like it for you to move forward. So it might have not touched the judges the way I wanted them to, but overall, it touched the larger audience. And I think for me, that's a huge win, because end goal is to touch the audience and to be able to change even one life.
Yeah.
On that note, I actually have a question for Aaron. When you said about that previously you were preaching and not sharing your personal story, and this is something I don't know if Tanvi struggles, but I've heard a lot of people, because I also do some coaching, and I've heard some of my clients tell me that, but what if I share the story? People will judge me, or people will see me differently after this. I'm not ready to share, or how will it impact my personal life if I share my story? But when I'm hearing you, I'm understanding that to be able to connect with your audience, you need to bring a personal story. How or how do you tell your brain that I am ready to bring that story to the stage, or how much should you share? Because you don't want to bring too much, because that will take the audience again on a different journey. How do you decide this much is good enough?
Well, it can definitely be subjective, but some of the rules that I follow with telling a personal story is, one, are you capable of telling the story without getting overly emotional? So, for instance, if you had a passing of a loved one and you want to make a speech about that loved one, that's great, and you can certainly do that. But are you going to break down in tears every time you give the story? If that's the case, then you may not be emotionally ready to tell that story. So there's the emotional part to it, where you need to be emotionally ready to give a speech. After that, I would say that you really want to take the audience into account. So there are some subjects for a Toastmasters audience, for instance, that probably are not going to resonate very well, especially if you start talking about the taboo topics. If you talk about sex, politics, or religion, generally Toastmasters will not like that. And of course, there are always exceptions. There are people who do very well with those topics in the contest. Not too many can win with it, though. So yeah, there are different elements that you need to think about it. But I would say first, look at it from an emotional standpoint for yourself, and then think about some of the sensitivities that your audience may have. So those should be your guardrails, or at least a couple of your guardrails, when you're thinking about what personal stories can you share.
Interesting. That definitely helps me understand more to what level of personal story bring. But tell me, I know we've had this conversation prior where you struggle with bringing your personal stories on. How do you deal with that?
Honestly, thanks to my mentor, Craig, is where I actually learned the art of telling stories. How, Dilip was the right mentor for you to help you come out of your shell and tell stories. Craig was that mentor for me who taught me the art of telling stories and made me comfortable telling my story with a sense of courage, vulnerability, and authenticity.
Hmm.
My brand of speaking for the last decade has been very inspirational because of the work that I do. I had never told a story for 10 years of being a professional speaker. Can you imagine that? But the moment I started telling my story with authenticity and vulnerability, I realized the shift in which, the audience connected with me. Because until then, exactly like you, I was sort of preaching, I was sharing my knowledge, wisdom, and I got to speaking very young as well. So it was very difficult for me also to connect with the audience because there was no experience of, what is it that a 50-year-old seasoned leader is sitting in the audience and thinking, and here I am like, a late 20 something on the stage, possibly most of the times the only woman in the room in India, talking about things like thought leadership, legacy, personal branding, social media, presence, visibility. It had been very challenging for me to connect with my audience. I knew my stuff, I knew my subject, but I wasn't able to connect, and hence the connect, because the connection was missing a lot of times, the trust was missing a lot of times as well. So only when I learned how to transcend all those blocks which were hampering my connection with the audience, that's when I had audience not only just come up and tell me how deeply they connected with the message I had to share with them, but it led to honestly with a few standing ovations as well, and I had tears in my eyes because a decade I couldn't feel the connection, and after that, imagine that first time you tell your story with authenticity and vulnerability, the whole room is standing up. So I have seen the power of telling a story with that level of humanity firsthand, and I it still gives me goose flesh to go back into that moment. But that's my journey, Asha. You've known that. I just want to share that with Aaron because I know there's something out there in terms of telling your story, but more importantly, as a speaker, and not stories of other people from your life. That really helps people heal something within themselves.
Yes.
Then I also want to understand. You talked about art of storytelling, Aaron. When you're crafting a speech, do you picture yourself? And again, this is something I practice, and I want to know if that is something we share in common, or if you have any other advice. When I'm writing my speech, I focus who my audience is, and is this message going to land with them. So, for example, if I'm talking to my children, the same story would have a different tone and a different variation of it. But if I'm giving the same speech to in a corporate place, same
Hmm.
story but different tone and variation. How important it is to keep that in check. And you also talked about, when you were talking about previously, that how when you delivered about the three pigs and the dream, and you had big vocal variation and everything else, along with your storytelling. And I know this is a very heavy loaded question, but when you're bringing your storytelling, your personal story, how important is that tone variation based on who your audience is?
Hmm. So I haven't experienced too much of a difference in my tone variations. That hasn't been a particular piece that I've gotten feedback on that the audience may or may not like. But I have had challenges with my vocal variation as I spoke more, because one of the problems with a lot of speakers is that they they don't have too much of a dynamic range in their voice. And then two, what I noticed was, especially in that 2014 speech example that I gave you, was that I went to the too far to the extreme. And having vocal variation, having vocal variety, it doesn't take that much to achieve. It's very hard actually to be monotone. For instance, if I wanted to be monotone, I would just speak like this for the entire time that I speak, and this would be the way that obviously would be monotone. And that's not how I naturally speak. I speak naturally like this, and I'm not going crazy with my vocal variations, but you do hear some changes in my pace, you hear some changes in my pitch, and you'll hear me pause every now and again as I'm trying to think and formalize. And when I give a tip, I let it end and I just let some pause or let some silence stand for a bit for people to absorb exactly what I've said.
You
Okay.
mentioned pauses.
Mm.
Sorry, go ahead, Tanvi.
Yes, I want to ask. I have seen a lot of people struggle with tone play, right? It doesn't come very easy for people because men, usually, in my coaching experience, seen are not very expressive as women.
Yeah.
So for them to bring in those variations and expressiveness with their tone, because for me, tone is nothing but the existing emotional state of being at that point of time when you're talking about that topic. That's
Mhm.
going to reflect in your tone. It's your state of emotional feeling, how you're feeling about that topic in that moment, how authentically you are reliving that story. That's the tone that you're going to speak with, correct? And men are not able to do that with that much transparency. What is your advice for men who struggle with, bringing in emotional authenticity in their speech? It doesn't have to be a story, in just their speech overall.
Yeah. I think men would benefit from learning that just because you can tap into emotions, especially during storytelling, it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you less than a man to share your emotions and share your thoughts. So that's one. I think especially in Western culture, and actually Western and Eastern cultures, men are supposed to be stoic. They're supposed to be strong. They're supposed to not be weak. That's what we're told. Don't be weak. And we equate emotions to weakness, which is far from the truth. I think getting over that stereotype and that standard that society has placed on us is step number one, getting over that. But then two is also realizing that emotion doesn't mean overly emotional. Remember when I talked about telling a story, and if you're not ready to tell that story, if you break down and cry when you talk about that loved one that may have passed in your story, then you're not emotionally ready to give that. But that's a very strong emotion. It doesn't always have to be that strong. You can convey emotion in so many different ways. Even going on a stage and smiling, for instance, that sets a tone, for instance, with your audience. Like, oh, okay, you're enjoying being on stage. You enjoy talking about whatever it is that you're talking about. And then two, if you have something that's more somber, it's not a matter of pretending to cry. It's not a matter of tears coming down your eyes, but you can convey that in the pace and the tone. So maybe instead of just speaking loud and vibrantly, you lower your pitch, you decrease your pacing. And that now starts to give a more somber tone to the speech. And I've done all of that just through voice. So it kind of goes into the vocal variation piece that we were talking about before, where it doesn't need to be extreme, but you
Right.
can do a lot with pacing, you can do a lot with volume. And two, I would always say to keep it natural. So don't do something that seems completely foreign to you and unnatural. I'm all about getting on stage, and one of the best compliments that I can get when I get off of the stage and I start talking to people is, "Oh, you're the same way that you are on the stage as you are off the stage." That is the perfect compliment for me.
True. So, you're one of the few world champions who've got a career going over and above, speaking as a career or coaching as a
Yeah.
career potentially. Um, What did you take back to your corporate life from your whole journey of being a much better orator, communicator, speaker? How has that helped you in your career?
I think primarily it's helped me gain more confidence in my career.
Hmm.
As I said before, I was a shy person. I wanted to be in the background. I didn't want to raise my hand and stand out. When I joined Toastmasters and when I started competing and winning contests, I started to realize, hey, this is an ability that a lot of people don't have. A lot of people cannot do what I do, and even fewer can do it better. So I started to lean into that and find ways to speak to an audience, whether that was speaking up in a meeting, whether that was going to one of our corporate town halls and raising my hand to ask a question. Asking questions, just a quick tip, one of the best ways you can stand out in your career is asking good questions to your seniors, because a lot of people don't even want to ask questions. And it's amazing. But it helped me definitely with the confidence. And then, two, when I became world champion of public speaking, something just clicked inside of my head that said, you know what? I spoke in front of an audience of over 2,000 people, and I became world champion of public speaking. Why the heck am I afraid to speak to this one boss in a room by ourselves? To
Right.
me, that was a mindset shift that really helped me focus and see my senior leaders as just, you know what, this is another audience, and I can use the same techniques that I've used over the years in Toastmasters to formulate a message and give it to them.
Hmm.
That is so relatable to me, Aaron. I remember about 6, 7 years back, I would, if you tell me to go present something to the senior VP, and I would stutter. I would be sweating bullets. I would be like weak in my knees and not wanting to go. I would do the work, but somebody else, please go present it. But after I've joined Toastmasters, I'm sitting in the room of CEOs and all senior leaders, and I'm able to just be myself, present my presentation or the story that I'm saying, and just comfortable without feeling zero nervousness. So yes, I completely relate to that. But I have another question relating to that. How do you balance? Because I know Toastmasters, especially during contest season, there is so much travel. You get
Yeah.
invited to pretty much a lot of districts for their events. How do you balance your full time work along with public speaking and coaching?
It comes by learning how to say one word. No. You have to be strategic with what you say yes to. And you can say yes to every single request that comes your way, but you will quickly find, as I did, that that will drain you considerably. And it's not a matter of being mean, it's not a matter of being stubborn or anything like that. It's really protecting your time, and where do you feel that your time is most valuable? And sometimes the answer is probably just no for now, but let's connect at another time. So it's, if you focus on what is most important, that is where obviously you need to focus the most of your attention. So for me, that's my career. I will not prioritize too much above my career at this point in time, because for me that's easy, because that's my job, pays the bills.
Agreed.
Public speaking, I love it, but right now it doesn't pay the majority of my bills.
Hmm.
So if I get a lot of speaking requests and they conflict with my job, it just doesn't make sense for me to do that. So you have to really think about where is the best benefit, where's the best value, and is your time best done or best spent doing that task.
I struggle with saying no, but I like what you just said. No for now. Let's connect later. I'm
Mhm.
definitely, that's a huge takeaway for me. Tanvi, what about you? Do you struggle saying no as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think, but off late, I've been very clear about my priorities, and if it's not aligned to my values, more importantly, then it's a hell no for me.
Yeah.
I like that attitude. On that note, I'd like to bring a question for you from one of our past champions who's been a guest here, Aaron.
My question to you is, with winning this title of being world champion, how often or how much have you had to deal with imposter syndrome?
Wow, that's a
Interesting.
great question.
I don't think the being champion didn't give me the imposter syndrome because, as I had mentioned before, in 2016, I had placed second in the World Championship of Public Speaking. That's actually the trophies that you see behind me are the second place trophies. And even winning second place, there was so much fanfare. There was so much love and being embraced that I knew what to expect if I were to ever win the World Championship of Public Speaking. So because I was embraced, I feel that I didn't have to suffer from the imposter syndrome when it came to the contest. The imposter syndrome, I believe, came a little bit after the contest, and even after winning second place, for instance, and feeling good about that. It was when I went into the professional speaking and I started to want to charge money for my speaking. And it was there that the imposter syndrome started taking root. Whereas, oh, wow, you've had this company pay so much money for you to speak. Are you really that good, though?
Correct.
And so now I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe I should decrease my price because I'm not that experienced of a speaker. I'm still fairly young. Will people look at me a certain way? I still have a little bit of a fear, even at work, where somebody's going to figure it out one day that I don't have it all together, that I don't know exactly what I'm doing at all times. But at the same time, when I've gathered more experience and wisdom, I started to realize, well, that's the same for a lot of people. So I'm not alone there. And honestly, even with that experience, even with that wisdom, I still struggle with imposter syndrome sometimes where I think, why am I here? Why am I doing this? But you have to learn how to act despite the imposter feeling that you may have. And when you find out and when you start working and you start doing, you start realizing, oh, wait, no, yeah, I'm where I need to be.
I like that message, Lindsay. I'm worth it. Tell me your thoughts on that.
I'm still processing how he so beautifully, but so casually said that, it's okay to not have it figured out, regardless of what your achievements are. And if more people speak so boldly and bravely what you just said and are comfortable sharing their not being okay, as Aisha says it, or saying that it's okay, I don't have it figured out, I don't have my life figured out, I don't have my career figured out, I don't have my relationships figured out, but I'm proudly owning it instead of having this whole facade of pretense of being
Yes.
absolutely perfect, in control, in command of the adventure of life. We all would be just so much happier internally, more peaceful as human beings, sleep better at night for sure, but just be able to build such effortless and deep connections with people,
Yes.
which is missing in the world today. The only reason why we are able to connect with someone is when it's absolute naked conversation that you have with that person without any filters, without any facades, which is a rarity today. At least I have seen that in my own life, working with so many clients over these years. They struggle with this. They
Yeah.
struggle to let their guard down. I would love to
Absolutely.
hear your thoughts on it because you touched on that, So how well you've been able to integrate exactly what your beautiful message is, that it's okay. I let the world see that I don't have it figured it out.
Yeah. And for me, it was just understanding the stories that we resonate with. There are very few stories, if any, where you go in and you hear about the protagonist and then everything that they do is perfect, everything that they do is good, everything that they do turns out exactly right. And a lot of people try to play that character in their lives. So when you go onto social media, for instance, you just see all of the highlights that
Oh,
people post. You see, I could go on and see other speakers, and they're only showing the big audiences. They're only showing the high amount of sales, but
yeah.
they don't want to show the hard work that they did in the background. They don't want to show the days where there were barely anyone sitting in the audience. They don't want to share those downs. And it kind of goes into what we talked about before with being emotional, where people don't want to share these stories about their vulnerabilities. They don't want to share stories about not succeeding, because when we compare ourselves to these other things that we see on social media, or when we compare ourselves to others, we think, oh, well, this person didn't have those struggles, so I can't talk about that because I don't want to be seen as weak. I don't want to be seen as lesser than that person. But again, you're only seeing the highlights that they decide to share. One thing that I noticed when I started posting about my failures. I started posting about the challenges that I had, and people resonated so strongly with it. And I noticed other people, my peers even, posting all of these good things, and they're getting good responses, but they don't have that same connection that I was building with my audiences. So that really resonated with me and made me think, okay, I can share about the times when I feel down. I can share about the times when somebody gives me a disparaging comment on YouTube, for instance, and share that. I can share these things, and it makes me much more relatable. And one of the things that has become apparent for me over the years, so winning in 2019 just came with so much fanfare and so much support. And a lot of people have told me it's because they love the story of me going to the World Championship in 2016 and placing second, but then fighting year after year after that to get back to the world stage and ultimately win. And the story that I share with people in 2016 is that when I left the stage in 2016, I wasn't mad about placing second. I was mad because when I left the stage, I didn't feel as if I did my best. There was something that I left on the table. I didn't execute my story the way that I wanted to execute my story, and I regretted that for 3 years. And so I told people that story so that when 2019 came around, my goal was to not win the World Championship of Public Speaking, because I said I wasn't going to make that my goal. My goal was to do better than I did in 2016 and execute my story the way that it was supposed to be executed. And you don't get that triumph without talking about the struggles and the frustrations that you may have had. So it all helps with that connection. You have to be a little bit vulnerable.
Amazing. I think that's a perfect note for us to, unfortunately, wrap up the conversation, keeping the clock in mind. The power of vulnerability, as you put it, Aaron. I think it's not a weakness but a superpower. And the sooner men, women both realize that and internalize that in their lives across the dimensions of life, not just work, but even personal life, the sooner they'll be able to transcend everything that's holding them back and step into their fullest potential, is what I believe.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very, very beautiful note to wrap. My biggest takeaway is I'll go back to your speech, which has I'm like literally I get goosebumps every time I think about your message, acceptance for all. That is my biggest takeaway, especially being all we are global now. Everything is global. It's not you're not limited to a small town or a small city or even a country now. It's completely everything is worldwide. So that acceptance needs to be there for more peace to happen. That's my biggest takeaway. And second thing that I actually going to put in practice is practicing saying no in a diplomatic way. So that's my biggest takeaway. I'd like our audience to put in their comments what did you take away from and tell us who you would like to see next. And on that note, signing off, Aisha Hussain, Tanvi Bhatt.
Thank you, Aaron, for joining us today, inspiring us, teaching us, and obviously, sharing your journey with our audience as well. I'm really grateful for your time and presence, and thank you so much for being a part of See That Stage journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.